A glance in the mirror. Chapter 19. Home. Number 31 was built in 1933, with 2 reception rooms, 3 bedrooms, 2 of reasonable size, and the third a box room. There was a kitchen and upstairs bathroom. The exterior walls were pebble-dashed, and the bay roof and gable end hipped. The side entrance, behind a close-boarded wooden gate, led to the back garden. At the front of the house, facing the road, and acting as boundary with the neighbours, an obligatory privet hedge, standing 4 feet high. The hedge almost smothered a low cinder brick wall, built around wooden posts, supporting a barbed, broad-linked chain, which also served as a boundary marker to the next house. The house was built on a slight right-hand bend halfway down the road. The even numbers ranged opposite. Following the building line and almost directly facing our house, 4 lock-up garages with glazed wooden doors, one of which housed Albert's car. The other 3 remained empty throughout. Albert's car, an Austin 14, was on loan from the government. It was a large square-shaped saloon with leather seats, bulbous mudguards, and a battery and spare wheel bolted onto the running board. On most days it needed the engine turning over with a starting handle, with the choke closed, a valve that always started to work its way back to the open position. To ensure the engine fired, the driver had to pull out the choke, and then leap from the seat to grill, turn the engine over until it fired, and then bound back into the car to catch the engine firing, keeping the choke out until the engine had warmed up. This daily exercise guaranteed the driver was fully awake before chancing his life on the road. Elsie's neighbours on the right were the Williams, with sons Victor and Frank, who attended John Lyons School, and on the left Mr. and Mrs. Tripps, who kept a very low profile, hardly ever being seen. He a professional gambler of greyhounds, and she a dedicated homemaker. Albert rarely talked to either neighbour, or passed the time of day with anyone in the street. He only recognised them by raising his hat. He never had a friend visit the house, except 2 maiden aunts and his mother at Christmas. His social life was at the Masons, an old contemptible association. Elsie had 3 regular friends, who called during the day and read the leaves. This required loose tea leaves to make the tea, which, when drunk, the cup and dregs were swirled round 3 times anti-clockwise, and then the cup was tipped upside down onto the saucer. The reader then examined the dregs left in the cup to give a forecast of the person's future. This was all taken quite seriously, and the readings referred to in future conversations. Elsie invited all visitors in. A cup of tea promoted conversation and relaxation before the open fire in the kitchen. A bow-topped, slatted wooden gate, painted drab green, greeted visitors to the house. It was the only means of entry to the house and garden. This reluctant guardian to the estate snapped either shut with the force of a rat trap, achieved by an over-tightened coiled return spring, or more often than not was propped open by a brick, the spring awaiting repairs. The open gate allowed you to enter up the quarry-tired front path, flanked by black, serrated-edged tiles. Flower beds on either side of the path were stocked with rather poor roses on the right and Michaelmas daisies on the left, both needing some of Mum's tender-loving care. The borders held London pride. The clay soil was light dun-coloured, forever needing lots of humus to grow anything really well. The London pride and grape hyacinths gave a cheery display as an edging, and under the sitting-room window a clump of white lilies leant over to get the sun. Before you, the panelled and glazed front door, with noticeable peeling paint, stood before you under a canopy of sheet lead. The stained glass front door matched the hall windows, the landing window and the small fanlights to the sitting room, all set in lead. These extravagances were in keeping with the architectural style. Only the hall, stairs and landing had a dado rail plus a picture rail. All the woodwork included doors, architraves, door frames, skirting and stair surrounds were stained brown to resemble dark oak. So too the embossed Lincruster wallpaper below the dado line. Both the interior and exterior design copied more expensive styles by using cheaper methods and materials to achieve a similar effect. The sitting room had a picture rail below a plaster cornice, matching the hall and dining room. The understairs cupboards filled in using tongue and grooved boarding. At the end of the hall, facing the front door, hung a picture of the royal coat of arms, flanked by two of Albert's dressed swords. Decorating the wall next to the front door, on the right, were crossed imitation Roman swords hung either side of a silvered mirror. On the wall opposite stood the hall stand, completely filled with coats, hats, scarves, umbrellas and walking sticks. Built into the centre of the hall stand, a glove box under a mirror. Coat hooks were screwed into the dado rail next to the hall stand, lining the wall, up to the stairs. The hooks strained with the weight of umpteen coats, scarves and hats. Shoes peeped out from beneath the coats, a favourite hiding place for the boys when playing hide-and-seek. Under the stairs, a larder and an overfilled hall cupboard. These completed the hall furniture. The larder had a marble slab and numerous shelves, a bread tin, cage for cold meats, cheese and butter dishes, plus a jug of milk, all resided on the marble slab. On the floor, a vegetable basket with separate containers held the usual fare, and either side on wall brackets were shelves filled with condiments and bottled sauces. The larder, ventilated by a wire mesh grill, covered a small window. This too was patched over with cardboard in the winter. The understair cupboard contained the Eubank carpet sweeper, dustpan and brush, Goblin cylinder vacuum cleaner that never worked, and a Singer sewing machine, and many shopping baskets and sundry bags. The best room was the lounge, the sitting room or front room, depending on whom you were talking to. It was in our house a formal dining room, for the few visitors who dropped in, and for very special occasions. It was undoubtedly the coldest, dampest, most universally uninviting room in the house. It held a large table that, by operating a winder to turn the ratchet, the two outer leaves were pulled apart. A third leaf was dropped in between. 4 dining chairs, 2 kitchen chairs and 2 carvers could be accommodated around its side. This complicated operation only occurred at Christmas time, needing every resource available to keep him calm. As to every gadget in the house, the table extender was temperamental in the extreme. A sideboard took up the entire wall immediately in front of the open door. 2 bookcases with glazed side cupboards stood either side of the chimney breast. One cupboard holding half-filled decanters and the other my father's service revolver. Placed on top, a framed box containing his medals taken out and worn once every year at the cenotaph, Remembrance Day. Opposite the fire, the table, and taking up the only other wall, the bay window looking out onto the street. A green-tiled surround and hearth with mirrored overmantel held the centre position. On his wooden mantelshelf chimed a French clock. No fireplace was complete without a fender and coal boxes. A fireplace companion set of poker, brush and shovel in a polished brass holder decorated the hearth. Perched on a high round table was a rather unhealthy-looking aspidistra in a round green glazed pot. This offending plant scattered innumerable small black seeds everywhere and led a charmed life. To my knowledge, it was never watered. 2 upholstered armchairs with tassels on the arms either side of the fireplace tried to give a lift to the room, give it a feeling of comfort and warmth. They failed miserably. 2 heavy curtains on runners framed the bay windows, permanently covered by lace suspended on stretched wire. This lace shut out much of the light and gave the room formality. It also prevented scrutiny of what was going on in the room. Nobody ventured to disturb the net curtains. Father considered any movement of the curtains likened to nosiness, bordering on the impolite. It was the general rule for all houses of that period to have lace coverings the window. A framed, silver-plated oval mirror on chains separated 2 Scottish river scenes hung from the picture rail, centred over the sideboard. Here, on top, were displayed the wooden nut bowl, biscuit barrel, and cut glass fruit bowl. The tasselled, patterned carpet fitted into the surrounding border of linoleum, which was nailed down. A painted wood standard lamp stood next to the round table holding the fern, which when lit cast a shadow of its tracery over the floor. The windows were hardly ever disturbed throughout the house. If they were, they could never be closed again, until the following summer had dried the wood out sufficiently to shrink the frame. When the aunts came to tea, a special effort was made to do everything perfectly. The cucumber, beetroot, mustard and cress sandwiches were made of white bread with the crusts cut off. There would always be at least 2 cakes available, displayed on stands with paper doilies peeping out from beneath. The tea, cups, pot, basin, arranged with precision on the best tray, all graced the table on top of a pristine tablecloth with razor-sharp creases. The back room, now the sitting room, had originally been intended as the dining room. The French doors to the rear led out onto the backyard and garden. It was always used as the sitting room. It offered privacy, which was lacking from the front, and what was convenient, situated on the warmer side of the house. A brass fender boxed in its maroon-tiled fire surround and hearth. This room was used for most weekends, mainly in the evenings when Bert lit the fire as early as possible to rid the place of damp. The fire's overmantel held a large mirror and various knick-knacks perched on the suspended shelves to give ornamentation. A pipe rack, spill containers, swan vesta matches, 2 porcelain figures of nubile dancers graced either end of the mantelshelf. Heavy curtains on poles drawn tightly together to keep out any draughts covered the French doors. 2 upholstered armchairs in the settee, a pair of small cupboards either side of the fireplace, and the upright piano, with a stack of music on top, and its accompanying stool, which twiddled around, which completed the furnishing. Light provided by a low-wattage central electric light bulb with a coolie hat fringe shade. On cold, wet and stormy nights, with the wind whistling round the house and blowing through the upturned branches of the trees, it was particularly comforting to be inside, in the warm. The rain beating on the windows invited the chairs to be drawn tight up close to form a semicircle round the fire, and once the rolled-up piece of carpet was thrust tight up against the bottom of the door to stop the draughts, the radio set tuned in for the light programme. Henry Hall's Guest Night, Bandwagon with Arthur Askey and Richard Murdoch, the BBC Doctor Charles Hill. Friday night is Music Night, Down Your Way with Franklin Ingleman, In Town Tonight, Old Time Dancing with Sidney Thompson, Valentine Dial as the Man in Black, and Edgar Lasgarden in Murder Intended. Lift Up Your Hearts, Life with the Lions with Ben and Bibi Daniels. Elsie would take up her knitting, usually from a wool unplucked from an old jumper, and the cat would jockey for position before the fire. It took a brave person to disturb the well-lit pipe. the warm slippered feet, and the sense of peaceful tranquillity. Albert's pipe would emit a stream of sweet-smelling rosemary. He was deep in his book. The kitchen was at the end of the hall, next to the larder and dining room, now the sitting room. It was about 10 feet square and became the hub of the family life. Most of the family meals were eaten there, entertained by the ancient radio with its fretted front, permanently tuned to the light programme. When first switched on, the radio emitted a series of high-pitched screeches and whines. Whilst all this was going on, Elsie darned, sewed or knitted. She never just sat or read. Being busy meant using her hands. Stan and Terry sat before the fire that held the jigsaw puzzle. The fire was heaped up, and the flickering flames cast its glow over everyone's face. Later, bread or crumpets were toasted as a treat. An alternative was baked potato in the ashes and a daub of butter. The plates would be passed round and the potato dug out with a fork, trying to save some of the butter from soaking in. The kettle would be put on for a cup of Horlicks, Ovaltine or cocoa. It is difficult now to describe the enormously satisfying comfort and security obtained by sitting round a smoking, cracking, ember-splitting fire on cold winter nights, with the wind rattling the doors and windows, the shadows created by the flickering fire dancing on the walls, and the badly tuned radio drawing one ever closer to the tale being told. Family meals were repetitive, and the maximum use of every scrap, saving beef dripping, stewing the meat bones for stock and soups, mixing butter and margarine together, the butter bought from home and colonial stores displayed on the marble slab behind the counter. The desired lump was cut off, salted, blended with a wooden cutter, and patted into shape with butter pats, leaving a fancy set of marks before placed into a grease-proof wrapper. Coffee was never drunk, being a middle-class beverage. We had camp coffee, essence from a jar, which tasted nothing like coffee. All main shops had an errand boy who delivered the order by bicycle with a basket on the front. Very few had a refrigerator. Dairy produce and meats would only last a few days, depending on the weather. All larders had a cold slab made of marble. Roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, the treat on Sunday, cold cuts on Monday, Tuesday, mince, Wednesday, cottage pie, rabbit or stewing steak, Thursday, fish on Friday and perhaps ham on Saturday, puddings, desserts or afters, some sort of apple dish with custard, using a pudding at every meal, even with the rice pudding or tapioca. However, Elsie persevered in all things which would save money, so puddings were inevitably custard pie and custard. Next door's garden held a cooking cherry tree, and the other neighbour a dessert apple, both vigorously scrumped, as were overhanging branches from trees along the road. To all the country the wireless was the chief form of entertainment in the home. Children found this was liberating, a view of the wider world, something their parents never had, as well as exciting way of whiling away moments between plays. Derek McCulloch, better known as Uncle Mac, produced the BBC's Children Hour. This programme ended in 1964. There were many much-loved programmes, especially Out with Romany, written by Bramwell Evans in about 1938, who pretended to go out for countryside rambles with his dog Rack and 2 children. These nature-loving walks talked about finding birds' nests, walking beside the stream, climbing over stiles and discussing how the weather affected the flora. All the interviewers and introducers were referred to as uncles and aunts. There was Toy Town, read by Uncle Mac, Derek McCulloch, and C.E. Hughes, the boy detectives Norman and Henry Bones, Castles and Their History, and Young Artists, Wind in the Willows, read by David Davis and Norman Shelley, and many other wonderful stories.